Hi, my name is Tomasz, but you can call me TSB. Welcome to my review of Operator 911. You can find a video where I explain how I do my reviews in the description. You can see the categories which qualified for Operator 911 on the screen now. Let's move on to the first category, Tutorial. The tutorial of this game is not that much of a tutorial in the common sense of the word. It won't teach you any mechanics, it is more of a crash course in first aid. But hey, you're actually learning things that are useful in real life. For example, I had no idea that a grease fire could be put out with a damp towel. I mean, it's logical, sure, but I don't know whether I would think of it in the heat of the moment. By far the largest drawback of the tutorial is the rather poor method of delivery. It reminds me of mandatory workplace safety training courses I have to take every year. Since the number of situations that were new to me was low, this is just a minor complaint. An easy solution for the delivery method would be to start a campaign mission smaller, have a more gradual progression with short training videos in between that would teach the proper course of action for different situations. The overall real-world benefits far outweigh the minor inconveniences though, so I'm giving this section 2 pluses. Let's move on to the next section, Core Design. The first half of this game's double helix is worker placement, a subgenre in the board game world. In brief, a player has a limited pool of workers of 3 colors that need to be used to resolve the problems the game world generates. Different colors represent the different branches of emergency services: blue for police, white for medical, and red for firefighters. Since the number of workers is limited within each color, the player needs to make quick decisions over priority. Events can be of a single color, for example, a heart attack is a medical event only, or they can be of a combination of colors, even all 3 at once. To resolve an event, a worker of a matching color needs to be allocated to said event. However, any worker can engage an event to avoid a timeout. The tricky part is that at least one worker of any color needs to remain with the event until it's resolved. Be careful not to get all your ambulances tied up in one place if they don't need to be there. The worker placement mechanic works great in 911 Operator as it keeps constant pressure on the player. In some cities, when all hell breaks loose, it's a great challenge to stay on top of everything. One can definitely feel the adrenaline pumping. Because of the rock-solid core game design, 911 Operator gets 3 pluses for this category. Let's move on to the next section, Graphical User Interface and User Experience. I understand that most of what I will cover in this section is the function of 911 Operator being the first game of Jutsu games. However, with some minor tweaking, a lot, if not all of these could have been improved or resolved completely. Which emergency service member deals with whom is not immediately apparent. The player needs to hover over a person to see what is being resolved. This could be easily mitigated by a color-coded set of lines. I suggest to scale the station icons based on the zoom level and remove their bounding boxes. This would improve the visual representation, since on the most zoomed out view the station icons are nothing but small squares of a different color. Identifying the effectiveness of any given unit is not possible from the units section. It is possible to see the names of the occupants and what they carry. With this information, the player can make a ballpark estimate of effectiveness. However, only sending a unit into action reveals the core stats of the personnel within. This can get annoying in the regular campaign. Since the player does not spend a lot of time in any one city, most personnel will have similar equipment. It is possible to rename vehicles, sure. However, this is a poor workaround for a proper solution to the problem. Showing stats over any vehicle on the map with a simple hover would be much more efficient. Resolution time is not shown outright. The player needs to hover over what is being resolved to see how much time remains. This could be easily fixed by showing resolution time near the item being resolved without prompting. I suggest to find a place for the event pop-up and anchor it there. It is frustrating to accidentally move an event pop-up in the heat of the action. Since I have been fighting with the GUI for the entirety of my 20-hour experience, I'm afraid I need to give this section 3 minuses. Let's go to the next section, Campaign. There are 3 ways to play the campaign of 911 Operator. The one recommended by the game at the start, Unique Stories, is also my recommendation, as several cities contain storylines that are specifically tailored towards them. Daily Routine is a variation of Unique Stories that I find very hard to recommend, as only progression through the cities is more difficult. However, In case you are interested in a tougher experience, then I would recommend bumping up the difficulty to hard or expert. Even better, if challenge is what makes you tick, pick pretty much any decent sized city on the planet and play on it in free game with a higher difficulty setting. Finally, the story of the campaign can be experienced in single city run. Similar to unique stories, calls are not repeated in single city run either. However, I found that each city is an integral actor in the crafted storylines, and something was just off playing the campaign in one of the available cities. I sensed that originally there was only one type of campaign planned for 911 Operator, the unique stories. As the management aspects were added, the single city run was probably added to let the player experience an RPG-like progression with his staff. I can't really justify the daily routine campaign, as this is essentially just an increase in difficulty. I could see an argument made that it would benefit the core game experience to have only the Unique Stories campaign with the management aspect completely cut. Units in this hypothetical modification could be preset, and the player would only get an overview of the units available for each duty. Players would still have the ability to experience the management side in the free game mode. You can probably tell that I'm quite torn on this aspect of the game, as there is a lot to love, but there are also a few huge missed opportunities. Because of that, I'll go with a single plus for the campaign. I hope the campaign experience will be more focused in the sequel 112 Operator. Let's move on to the next section. 911 calls. The second helix in the DNA of 911 Operator, and hands down the thing for which to get the game, are the 911 calls. To get a picture what I'm talking about, I'll play you a small sample from a generic early call.
Understood.
911, what's your emergency?
Hello, I would like to order a big pepperoni with extra cheese, please.
Excuse me, you have a wrong number.
Yes, I know. Oh, and 2 cans of soda.
Ma'am, do you have an emergency?
Yes, I do.
And you can't talk about it because of someone in the room?
Yes, exactly.
Do you also need medical attention? Is somebody hurt?
Yes, do you know how long it will be?
I have an officer about a mile away. I'll send it right away.
Yes, please.
Are there any weapons in the house?
Yes.
Can you stay on the line with me?
No, thanks. I hope we'll get here soon.
All right, the officers are coming.
Ultimately, if responding to calls in a fashion shown in the short clip is not your thing, it will be quite difficult to fully experience 911 Operator. Jitsu Games showed great foresight in throwing similar situations at the player. Since calls are constructed to be modular, the player might think that they have already encountered the call when suddenly a single line changes a harmless situation into a critical one. This reinforced the great respect I have had for emergency call operators. While the game intentionally exaggerates the rate of emergencies, it does so to show how difficult this job really is. A split-second decision can mean that a person ends up living or dead. The voice work is really good. Both the performances themselves and the direction deserves huge kudos. I found myself jaw-dropped listening to what's happening in several situations, which of course I won't spoil, don't worry. The advice given by the player is evaluated at the end of a scenario, so even if you're not 100% sure about things, don't be afraid to make a choice. The game will tell you what can be improved upon, and scenarios can always be replayed. Seriously though, I can't praise the game enough for the 911 calls, and that means 3 pluses from me. Let's move on to the next section. Stats. Stats are worth delving into only when playing the single city run mode, as the player doesn't really spend that much time in any one city. In every other mode, it is perfectly sufficient to just throw whoever is available into vacant slots. With enough workers and some management skills, most scenarios are easily beatable on the normal difficulty on the first try. Even in single city run, min-maxing is not necessary. However, with all DLCs, you are looking at roughly 25 duties in the same environment. Unless staff is skilled in action, most of the crew will be at the max level before the end of the run. Because of that, it is preferable to start with people that have the best base stats at the start of the run, as leveling up increases these. Most units are universal and can help with any event. Each unit has 2 slots that can be filled with equipment. Equipment provides bonus to a skill, which gives the player a good opportunity to customize units to fit his playing style. Want to have a police van loaded with badasses carrying riot gear and assault rifles? No problem. Want to have an ambulance that can handle technical jobs? Load them up with technical tools and see them tackle both white and red events. At the end of the day, there is something here for all the min-maxers. It just needs to be found with a magnifying glass and a shovel, which means I'll go with a net 0 for this category. Let's move on to the next section. Comm Chatter. Background sound design is worth bringing up, as minor comm chatter is heard throughout the chapters. On its own, it reinforces the theme pretty nicely.
Sorry, 10-4, thank you. I'm on desk.
I would have preferred a larger variety of recorded samples, as without any changes in volume or pitch, the samples start to get stale by late game. Campaign events break up the monotony nicely.
We're ready.
However, these are not available in free game. Unfortunately, I find myself turning the volume of the game down after a few duties in free game. However, given how much time is spent in campaign missions, I will go with a solitary plus for the background sound design. Let's move on to the next section. Options. First of all, I need to put forth a core tenet of mine. It is absolutely paramount for any game to have at least basic options like sound levels editable from within the game. Midway through a free game session, I found myself craving some music and wanted to decrease the in-game volume. To my dismay, I had to leave the duty to do so. Since this is very important, I will repeat it again, it is never acceptable to have the player lose progress due to a setting problem. Sound volume settings in general are quite strange, as they don't seem linear but exponential instead. While the whole left side of the scale barely changes the output, one has to be very careful on the right side of the scale. On the other hand, I applaud Jitsu games for including a possibility to mute the operator for increased immersion. I would advise against this in the first playthrough due to the great voice acting. Furthermore, the Spartan video and control settings lay entirely outside the game. As a result, I have not realized that the game speed controls have hotkeys. It's X and Z, by the way, you're welcome. What we have available for options in 911 operator is barely above an ini file. I'll let it slide for now with 2 minuses, but please, please, please add a proper in-game options menu in the 112 operator. Let's move on to the next section. Endless mode. An unexpected but welcome addition is the free game mode. In this mode, the player is free to select virtually any city on the planet. The game downloads the map of the city, identifies and marks locations of emergency services, and allocates a reasonable contingent of units for the first duty. It is possible to play even in a fairly small city. The city I'm showing you right now has a population of only 15,000. However, I would suggest to pick a city that has a more intricate network of emergency services. Basically anything with a population above 100,000. The entire set of emergency calls is available, but repeats are inevitable as this is basically an endless mode. Messing around in familiar surroundings is fun in most games, and this is not an exception. 911 Operator thus receives a plus for this little twist on its endless mode. Conclusion. Operator 911 scored on my highly arbitrary scale a net positive of 6 out of whatever. It is definitely a diamond in the rough. There are quite a few quality of life items that can be improved upon. It shows that this is the first game of Jitsu games. However, it is also an intriguing proposition. Making split-second decisions in well-constructed and voice-acted 911 calls is far from enjoyable in the classic sense of the word. Some of the calls genuinely send chills down my spine, while others force me to contemplate ethical ramifications of a hasty decision. Of course, there were a lot of mundane calls as well, but that's exactly the point. Doing the job of a 911 operator is far from easy, but it is darn interesting. And thanks to this game, the experience is now accessible even to you. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed. Feedback is always appreciated. Leave yours down below, then hammer that subscribe button. This is TSB, signing out. Bye.